Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. Last week there was a lively discussion on Reddit concerning AoE2 game balance, and to what extent you can trust ladder win rates as reported on sites like AoE Stats, AoE Pulse, and AoE Insights. I don't spend a ton of time on Reddit, besides Lord of the Rings memes of course, as that page is hilarious. But this particular post in the AoE2 subreddit brings up a few common talking points around ELO and win rates, challenging the validity of win rate data. My feeling toward the public win rate data is you have to be aware of sample size limitations, the mix of Civ-pickers versus random Civ players affecting the numbers in different ways, as well as the fact it gives a single number distilling how the Civ performs on every different map and Civ matchup, which is why I personally try to make a habit of going a bit deeper into what's actually going on in those various game lengths and maps. The stats can be a powerful tool for building a more informed discussion and identify outliers and patterns. Even if there are caveats, I say let's not make perfect the enemy of good. Either way, to get into the post, the premise and takeaway argument is that Civ win rate should not be used to balance Civs, and if there are good arguments to be made here, then I think we should hear them out. The first argument is a very common one I see, which is that low elo players aren't playing optimally, so Civ choice doesn't matter. In this case, saying players under 1000 elo and maybe even 1500 aren't utilizing Civ bonuses to their potential, while sub 1000 elo players aren't even making farms or researching horsecolor, essentially clicking buttons randomly. This is obviously exaggeration, but summarizes a common belief that Civ strength impacts the game to a lesser extent at low elo, citing so many mistakes at lower levels that those must clearly outweigh the impact of Civ bonuses. I think we can all acknowledge that Keton Pastures aren't going to carry you up the ladder more effectively than cleaning up your Dark Age inefficiencies, but I disagree that means civilization choice has less impact for those players, not based on feelings or intuition, but because it completely contradicts the data we have. To me, this argument makes an obvious prediction that for low elo players, say the bottom quarter of the player base, civilizations should all be exactly or very close to a 50% win rate, while for the middle half of players, we start to see more spread between the worst and best civs, maybe 45 to 55%, and for the top quarter, we'd see even more, maybe a 40% to 60% spread, becoming most pronounced for the top 1%, who are playing so optimally that Civ balance is a major factor in the outcome. In reality though, this is not the pattern you see, especially once you take variability from sample size into account. AoE Stats has a bug this patch where it's not recording the vast majority of Jurchen and Keton games, which is unfortunate timing for this video, so we'll use AoE Pulse for this instead, as it seems a bit more reliable. What we see from the last couple of patches is a range from 45% to 55% win rate at low elo, with each of these plus or minus roughly 1% in their confidence intervals. Removing the top and bottom 5 civs as potential outliers, the middle 3 quarters of the civilizations land between 47.9 and 54.2%, again for just those with 850 elo and lower. That all sounds reasonably close to 50%, which remember was the prediction for the Civs don't matter at low elo crowd. But the problem is that's almost identical to the range we observe for mid-elo players and the 1200 plus group. In some cases, we even see a slight narrowing of that range. And there's no clear pattern that civilization strength is becoming more impactful, which remember was the prediction. Does it completely disprove the claim? No, but this is all much more aligned with the idea that civilization has a similar impact at all levels, and would have to be explained with something a bit more tangible than trust me bro. Of course, different civilizations and types of bonuses tend to be favored at different levels, but that's not really the initial claim. For the top 1%, you can maybe argue there's a greater spread in the top and bottom civs, though this is also just a tiny fraction of the number of games we have for the other groups. And if we remove the top and bottom 6 instead of 5 to try to control for outliers, the range is not that different from the other levels. If you take a similar sample size of sub 450 elo players, you get just as much or even slightly more variability, and that's just small sample sizes for you. I think the reason the Reddit poster doesn't try to back up the claim that Civ choice doesn't matter at low elo is that the data doesn't support it, at least in the sense that players are clicking random buttons and aren't using Civ bonuses, so they're all interchangeable. Now that said, people can mean it in a different sense, and maybe some are instead saying a preferred Civ choice for a low elo player doesn't ultimately impact their progression, and I think we can all agree that improvement comes down to skills you develop and not picking better civilizations. That issue aside, the poster then goes on to argue that balance should only be around higher levels of play. I think a lot of people would agree with that, though I personally think you can have special consideration for high-level balance and pro player input without completely ignoring the health of the civs for the other 99.9%. I just don't agree this has to be an either-or situation as it's often framed, especially given the player base is who keep the game alive, and as we've seen, are just as impacted by balance changes. Though the Reddit poster is entitled to their opinion on this, and I know they aren't alone in thinking that pro player balance is the only priority. He then makes a factual claim though, that you can't even trust win rates at higher elo ratings entirely because players almost always use random civs, and this prevents us from seeing how good a civilization really is. We would really get to see how good a civ is if a pro player focused just on it, using Ketons or Chinese as an example. I love this post because it's bringing up another interesting topic around elo to do with civ choice, though in this case has it backwards. Remember, the whole point of an elo system is to match you up against someone you have a 50% chance to beat. So if you only play one civilization, even if that civ is holding you back by say 100 elo because it's so weak, you should still settle on a rating. You'll just settle at a lower elo baseline than you would with a more powerful civ. If everyone only played one civilization, in fact, the win rates would actually all be closer to 50%, simply because the matchmaking system is trying to do that for everyone individually. It's actually the players who check the option for random civ that open themselves up to unexpected wins and losses due to civilization that reveal to us which ones are better than others. Of course, this does introduce a small bias towards civilizations that are easier to handle when you don't know what civilization you're going to get, with Chinese Ingot jars as two examples, where you have to be at least a little skeptical if they're really as bad as they look at lower levels. This whole thing actually feels like a bigger issue when interpreting AoE4 stats rather than AoE2, as their win rates on AoE4 World are within a similar or only slightly larger band than the AoE2 civilization outliers. Yet given how many players in AoE4 will focus on one civ at a time, all their win rates are squished toward 50% simply because of that fact. Someone maining Holy Roman Empire or Chinese may be playing a full rank below their potential, or someone playing House of Lancaster a rank above their true skill on the back of those civ choices, and yet the elo system matches them with opponents to intentionally coax them toward a 50% win rate. Enough players still play random civ to see some spread on AoE4 World, but the idea that random civ somehow hides civ differences feels like it has things backwards. That said, within this easy to dismiss argument, the Reddit poster brings up, I think, an insightful point that I've never seen anyone explore, but does muddy this very simple theory I just outlined. He points out if you had a pro pick only Chinese, the win rate would rocket up, and suppose someone in the pack of 27 and 2800 players did exploit a broken civilization, call it Chinese, and was then able to fly up to a 3200 rating overnight. The usual argument about elo forcing you into a 50% win rate really wouldn't hold up, as that player couldn't find such opponents, and the genius of the elo system is it can accommodate this by just giving you 1 point for a win, or even just a fraction of a point, while taking away many points for each loss. You can win almost every game, but as long as you lose every now and then, it'll keep your elo stable over the long run, despite a far better than 50% win rate. This isn't just theoretical, we see this in the data, and if you look at the top accounts, all of them have an above 50% win rate, some in the 60s or even low 70s, with a lot of games played. To me, this would be an argument against relying on top player win rates, besides the often very low sample sizes, but the implications actually go a bit further. Even looking at 1400s, just about all of these players have above a 50% win rate. Now, you could say, of course they do. They had to get from 1000 to 1400, which requires some extra wins. But that only takes a handful, as exemplified here by two players at 1401 elo that are 10 and 0. For other players, it seems like the difference is often 20 or 30 plus extra wins, and you can find even more extreme cases, which I suspect is a result of the distribution of players. As the matchmaking system tries to find you someone within 50 or 100 elo, or if it's still having a hard time matching you with someone, it will expand to even 150 or 200 elo in each direction. It's simply more likely when you're above average to find someone slightly below your skill level, as there are just more players in that direction who could be queuing in that moment. When you play someone lower than you, a win gets you fewer points than you risk losing, and you need slightly more wins than losses in that situation to keep the same rating. The effect of this is that higher rated players who pick the same civilization every time probably slightly inflate those civilizations in the rankings, despite the elo system in theory pushing both toward 50%. That 50% win rate isn't a hard rule. The example of a 3200 rated player with Chinese being matched up with others who are 400 to 800 elo lower is an extreme example, but I feel like a smaller version of that is happening throughout the ladder, and is one of many wrinkles in trying to interpret win rates. I should note there aren't that many single Civ-pickers in AoE2 though, which isn't a vibes-based argument, and can actually be verified. From the data I've seen, more than half of players don't pick any civilization in more than 20% of their games, and less than 1% of players use the same civ over 80% of the time. Most players play random, or at least have enough variety that we don't have to worry about it messing up the stats too much. The last major point in the post is you can't directly interpret, say, a 58% win rate, because the real advantage could be much larger, but win rates tend to converge to 50%. Everyone kind of knows this already, I feel, if for no other reason than Civ-pickers push win rates toward 50%. No one really looks at the specific win rate in isolation and obsesses over that particular number in my experience, so it's a criticism that just doesn't land for me. The importance of win rates is to tell us about outliers, and if there are patterns, that can flag civs who need obvious attention. The Hun's win rate on Land Nomad is 61.4%, for example, which in isolation tells us almost nothing until you look at everyone else is at 55% or lower. Saying that 61% is an underestimate doesn't invalidate the stats, and if anything, is more reason to take even modest-looking differences seriously. Obviously, the numbers always have to be put in context, and there's no shortage of stat context police out there to make sure everyone is doing that. The comments were a little harsh in the post, and I don't mean to pile on, with a lot of them pointing out the mistakes I brought up, and no one acknowledging what I thought was the best point. One interesting comment noted pro players even recently got the shoe wrong at release, who turned out to be a top civ despite initial impressions. You have to keep in mind the pressure on full-time content creators to have something to say on every topic, and it's hard to predict new civ balance, though is maybe a fair point to bring up in this context, with someone claiming only pros should weigh in and we should ignore win rate data entirely. Sometimes those things are at odds, and the data ends up being correct, as pros have bias and are fallible just like everyone else. Either way, I hope I didn't misrepresent any of the posters' points. While I disagree with some of what they said, civ balance that incorporates pro feedback and ideas plus win rate data just seems like the smart move to me, and it feels like the devs are already doing that, giving us pretty remarkable civ balance considering there are over 1,200 unique 1v1 civ matchups across a variety of maps and skill levels. That'll do it for this one though. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you next time.